So I would like to thank everyone for being here today for the launch of the coalition to form the first national commission in the United States on child sex abuse. This distinguished gathering of organizations, and there are a total of 29 organizations now that stand behind President Obama and his administration, following the lead of the Australian Royal Commission, which has now in fact studied and created a database about sexual abuse in institutions. It is a remarkable development in Australia, but in Washington, D.C., not one member of Congress, not one president has ever uttered the phrase clergy sex abuse. The Catholic Whistleblowers have been working from inside the Catholic Church for over a decade, trying to find a way to make this a world that is safer for children. As the Catholic bishops gather today in Baltimore, the Catholic Whistleblowers are here in Washington, D.C., basically saying that it is time for the government to do the investigation of all institutions and family on child sex abuse in order to end this epidemic. Let me start by introducing myself. I'm Professor Marcy Hamilton. I work on these issues and statute of limitations reform across the country. And now let me introduce you to Bob Hotzen and Father Jim Connell and Maureen Turlish, all from Catholic Whistleblowers.
My name is Dr. Bob Hotzen. I'm with Catholic Whistleblowers. I'm also the founder and co-founder and president of Road to Recovery. And just to give you a brief history of why we're here today, Catholic Whistleblowers has undertaken a number of steps to reach the Vatican, and our appeals to the Vatican, for the most part, have gone unanswered. We have submitted cases to the Vatican for removal of bishops. We've also petitioned the Vatican to do certain things relative to sexual abuse by clergy, etc. And what we have decided is that our appeals have fallen on deaf ears, and we don't expect those ears to open too widely in the near future. Consequently, we've undertaken, with Marcy Hamilton's assistance, an appeal to President Barack Obama. President Obama, it's time to establish a national commission on sexual abuse of children. It is of epidemic proportions. 60 million Americans will or are suffering from the pangs of having been sexually abused as children. And so we appeal to you today, President Obama, to take this as a major cause of your administration, to help children, to help victims, and to finally address this epidemic of child sex abuse.
Father Jim Connell.
Father Jim Connell from Milwaukee, a member of Catholic Whistleblowers. I would add to what Bob has said simply by saying the Catholic bishops have demonstrated they're not capable of really contributing any leadership to this cause of protecting children. They make no effort to verify that all the priests who have abused children are in fact out of ministry. We have no way of knowing it. We can't prove that. That ought to be different. They should be doing that. And the bishops have argued with the causes of trying to reform statutes of limitations, and that is also something that they demonstrate they're not the leaders. So we call on President Obama now to provide the leadership to truly protect children by establishing this national commission.
Maureen, do you want to say a
Sister
few
Maureen
words?
Turlish, founding member of Catholic Whistleblowers from Wilmington, Newcastle, Delaware, and Philadelphia. We know that most powerful institutions, whether it's a religious denomination or a public denomination, whether it's Penn State University or whatever, the abuse of power in these very powerful institutions has led these leaders to neglect to put the power of the institution and the power that they have as members of the institution to cover up. We know, everyone here knows of the depth and breadth of the cover-up in one denomination, but it's not one denomination. It's a number of religious denominations and private institutions as well. This needs to be changed. We spend a lot of time spinning our wheels, getting the laws changed, statute of limitations changed, state by state by state. But it's an epidemic. It's a pandemic worldwide, and it's time that we address this on a national, on a federal level. and that's why we're here today. Thank you.
So we have a number of groups that are joining forces with Catholic Whistleblowers asking the President for a National Commission on Child Sex Abuse. Let's start today with John Salveson of the Foundation to Abolish Child Sex Abuse.
Hi there, my name is John Salveson. I'm the president of the Foundation to Abolish Child Sex Abuse. I was abused as a child by a priest in the Roman Catholic Church growing up in New York, and I've been working on this issue for 35 years. The first 25 of those years I spent trying to get the Catholic Church to do the right thing, and eventually understood that their definition of the right thing and my definition of the right thing were 180 degrees opposite. I have believed for a long time and believe even more today that the only way to protect children and solve these problems is to get our criminal justice system, our courts, and the federal government involved. And that's why we're here today, to encourage the President to create a commission to study the sexual abuse of children. The institutions that condone and promote this have been doing this for decades and decades and decades. And if we think for 1 minute they are going to police themselves and have a change of heart and do the right thing, we're fooling ourselves. So that's why I'm here on behalf of the Foundation to Abolish Child Sex Abuse, and hope we will see some action from the President. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Mai Fernandez. I'm the Executive Director of the National Center for Victims of Crime. 33 years ago, President Reagan appointed the Presidential Commission on Victims of Crime. That panel's findings and recommendations helped to transform our nation's response to victims. It found that victims were an integral part, yet often overlooked part of our criminal justice system, and that they should be treated with fairness, dignity, and respect. In response, every state passed laws that recognized the rights of victims in criminal cases. Positions for victim advocates were created to assist victims through the criminal justice process, and Congress passed the Victims of Crime Act, which used fines to pay by convicted criminals to assist victims. All of that came out of the brave and compassionate move from President Reagan. Today, we are asking President Obama to have the same kind of passion and courage, and to help young victims of sexual abuse across our country by starting a National Commission on Child Sex Abuse. Thank you.
My name is Kevin Flood. I'm a representative of SNAP, the Survivor Network of Those Abused by Priests. I am also a survivor. In the 30 years that SNAP has been investigating issues related to priest abuse of children, the focus has been obviously on the Catholic Church. The realization of what this group represents is that it is a much broader-based problem than the Catholic Church. And we are appealing to the courage of our elected representatives, starting with the President, to begin to take a look at it on the broad basis that it needs to be looked at. Otherwise, we will continue to do and ignore the abuse that is so rampant among the citizens and obviously the children of America. Thank you.
My name is Mary Ellen O'Loughlin. I too am a survivor of child sex abuse. I'm honored to serve as a board member of the Foundation for Survivors of Abuse. The foundation was founded 3 years ago by Desiree and Deandra Brown, members of the classical group The Five Browns, after they successfully prosecuted their father for years of abuse. The abuse and prosecution took place in Utah, a state that has taken great legislative strides to ensure all victims have this opportunity. Not all states do. FSA is committed to the elimination of the statute of limitations in cases of child sex abuse, ensuring all survivors have fair and full access to justice and healing. We know adverse childhood experiences affect individuals for the rest of their lives. We need only to look to the ongoing ACE study. Sex abuse is particularly heinous and traumatic. Children are particularly vulnerable. Protecting our children is vitally important. Part of that protection is to ensure that those who are abused have their rightful access to the legislative process without arbitrary limitations. The Foundations for Survivors of Abuse stand strong with the members of this coalition as a voice for our country's abused children. Child sex abuse victims are not provided a voice in legislation. Adults must be that voice, and we, here today, are that voice. We will work to protect our underrepresented youth and to provide survivors access to the legislative process.
Good afternoon. I'm Marlon Wilbanks. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm on the board of directors of a organization called Voice Today that works with both prevention and healing of victims of child sexual abuse. I would say to President Obama that we are in a critical juncture of this country. We're dealing with millions of children without a voice. The children that are abused are neither Republican nor Democrat. They're victims. They have had an attempt at the murder of their soul. At this time, I'm very appreciative of the role of the Catholic Whistleblowers, but I'm sorry to say that the borders of child sexual abuse are not limited to the Catholic Church. It's everywhere, and we need the help of this president, his administration, and this Congress. I would also say that we need this commission so badly to make our laws uniform. I'm an attorney, and I don't see any reason why the statutes of limitation should be different from the victims in Georgia than they are in New York or they are in Florida. The number of children that are hurt every day is unbelievable. The number of opportunities that we miss every day is unbelievable. And more than that, it's unforgivable. Let's draw the line now with you and your administration. Leave a legacy that will matter. It will matter on both sides of the aisle, and most importantly, it'll save the children that we owe so much to.
I'm Neil Jaffe. I'm legal counsel for Vertigo Charitable Foundation in Northern Virginia. We advocate on behalf of the legal rights of adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse who seek justice against their perpetrators. I'm honored to join Professor Hamilton and my colleagues here in urging the government to form a national commission to address this epidemic problem. According to a study of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, there were over 63,000 reports of child sexual abuse in 2012. There are over 40 million adult survivors. It's time for the federal government to turn its attention to this epidemic. In recent times, the government has addressed sexual assaults in the military and on college campuses, but has neglected to address sexual assaults of children. We need a national commission to formulate and study how to protect children from abuse, to raise the public consciousness of this problem, and to pass legislation, including changing or eliminating statutes of limitations that would give adult survivors the right to hold their perpetrators accountable under the law. The formation of a national commission would be an essential first step in making the protection of children a national priority. Thank you.
I'm with Stop the Silence, Stop Child Sexual Abuse. We're an organization dedicated to the education, prevention, and awareness of child sexual abuse. I'm honored to be here and lend our voice with the other voices of these folks regarding the prevention of abuse and the reform of statute of limitations.
Let me just add that this is please come up. This is a non-denominational movement that goes across all institutions. What we're asking for is a federal investigation of abuse in both secular and religious, private and public institutions, including the family. And as part of that, the American Humanist Association, which is part of the largest growing number of believers in the United States, the fastest growing, the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, and so I have asked AHA to be a part of this.
Hello, my name is Matthew Bolger. I am the Legislative Associate and Lobbyist for the American Humanist Association, which Marcy mentioned represents humanists. We also work on behalf of church-state separation and the implementation of public policy, progressive values into public policy. We're here today to discuss an extremely important issue, and one that's extremely timely as well, that of the sexual abuse of children in the United States in public, private, secular, and religious institutions. The American Humanist Association has long called for the government to investigate child abuse in all sections of society, especially after the Catholic Church covered up the sexual abuse of children by priests. To humanists, this issue transcends religious, political, and philosophical differences. The right of a child to grow up free from abuse, be it from a stranger, family member, religious official, or anyone else, requires not only spoken advocacy against such crimes, but the creation by the government of a national commission to investigate the sexual abuse of children in the United States. For too long, advocates of children have been promised action and been told to wait for justice to occur. We can no longer afford to wait while a systematic epidemic of child abuse continues unabated, and while the perpetrators of these crimes continue to victimize even more children. The creation of a government institution tasked with investigating cases of child abuse will go a long way to ensuring that the guilty are brought to justice and show the countless number of Americans that have fallen prey to abusers that we care about their struggle and are willing to fight for their rights. Once again, I encourage the Obama administration and the American government to support the creation of a commission investigating child abuse, and we wish to do all that we can in this fight. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Eileen King. I'm Executive Director of Child Justice here in Washington, D.C. And Child Justice works with children who have been failed by the very systems that are supposed to protect them. These are our family courts and all the allied people who work with them, attorneys, evaluators, attorneys for children. And there is a spotlight needed. Just as there was a spotlight needed on the Catholic Church, there's a spotlight needed on how children are being put together with their sexual abusers through family court. If it's not right that a stranger has access to their victim, why is it right that a parent convicted of sexual abuse have access to their victim? And this is what we're seeing not just in this area here, but across the country. It is time for sunlight, transparency, and a real investigation that goes to the roots of these horrors. As was already said, the ACE study leaves us no choice but to protect children if we want to protect them and their lives, their future families, their work, their communities, our society. It's an honor to be here with everyone joining in this cause for a commission on child sexual abuse in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen.
Yeah.
Peter? With the Horace Mann Action Coalition, so we are also focusing on all schools, private and public.
Thank you. My name is Peter Brooks. I represent the Horace Mann Action Coalition, a group of concerned alumni from my school as well as other schools, to the service of prevention for child abuse. The American public is learning what the advocates and groups here have confronted for years to support survivors, the role of the institution in enabling most abuse. They see scattered reports in the news of individual instance abuse, and I think, frankly, they're unaware of the repeated crimes that go on behind the scenes relative to covering up and therefore enabling more abuse, not just in my school, not just in other schools, but in many institutions. Our goal was to find out what we could learn from this vast, decades-long abuse, and we wrote a report which is just representing what we found, but I think it reflects what all of us feel relative to the role of the institution in helping to prevent and confront abuse on an ongoing basis and respond to timely reports, alert authorities, seek other victims, counsel the victims. There are a host of things that institutions can do, and I'm confident that a national commission would bring to light a host of best practices that would have more effect on abuse than almost anything else, and I urge the President to consider that.
Have I covered everyone? So, thanks to every one of these brave survivors and groups who are fighting for children every day, and the groups that could not make it themselves. All of the statements by all of the groups in support will be available at sol-reform.com. And we ask you to join us, President Obama, to institute a national commission on child sex abuse. The United States federal government has ignored this problem for long enough, and it's time. Thank you. Thanks, guys.